Have you ever had a conversation you knew that you needed to have, but you kept putting it off? Now, if you're guilty of this, don't raise your hands, because we all do that, right? You know, maybe it's a conversation with your spouse. Maybe it's a conversation with your boss. Maybe it's a conversation with your doctor. Maybe it's an appointment that you didn't want to schedule. You know, this happened to me this last week. I wasn't feeling well, and my wife's telling me, you have to go see the doctor. And I told her, well, no, I don't want to. I know I need to go to the doctor, but I don't want to. And then, you know, a loving, persistent wife finds ways to get you to go to the doctor. She was threatening me, I'm going to go tell your mother. It's like, but she found a way to get me to go to the doctor, and I'm thankful for that. But there's always these kind of conversations we always try to avoid. We try to put to the side. We knew that these conversations matter. We knew that they could help us, but we avoided them. Why? Because they're uncomfortable. That's why we've been avoiding them. They're uncomfortable. I don't want to have to deal with this. Imagine one day you go to the mailbox, you found a bill that you've been expecting from a certain company, and you just leave it there because, guess what? I'm not ready to open that right now. Well, just leave it there for now. I'm not ready for this conversation. Now, when it comes to church, what is the most uncomfortable topic to talk about in church? Now, if you know it, shout it out. Sinning, okay? That's a good guess. That's an excellent guess, but it's not what I'm talking about today. The most uncomfortable topic to talk about in church is, if you paid attention to the children's story, you could have got the hint. It's money. So let me start with something very, very honest. We don't like to talk about money, especially in church, right? But we think about money all times. Because money shows up in every day of our lives. It shows up in our stress. It shows up in our decisions. It shows up in our discussions. It shows up in our marriages, in our plans, in our prayers. And here's the tension. We avoid talking about the very thing that often controls us the most. Now, if you think money is not important, hey, empty your bank account and just give it to someone else, and let's see how's that going to work for you. You know, according to this CNBC, who made a poll, it says that 77% of Americans are very stressed about their finances. This means that most of us here today are stressed about our finances. Don't raise your hand if you're stressed about your finances. We're all stressed about our finances, right? So even though we know that talking about it will help us, most of the time we refuse to talk about money. So today, I want to do something different, because today we're going to lean into it. We're not going to run away from it. I'm not trying to make anybody uncomfortable today. That's a disclaimer. I'm not making you uncomfortable with this uncomfortable conversation, but I want to bring clarity. I want to bring freedom. I want to bring truth into your life. Because when we understand money the right way, God's way, it stops being a burden and it starts becoming a tool. So today we're going to stop running from this conversation. We're going to bring the light and flash it into the corner of our life where we don't want anybody to look at it, right? I'm not saying bring your bank statements and just come here, let's discuss things. No. But money matters because it matters to us. So today we're going to look at God's view of money. And if we want to see something very clearly, we have to look at the foundations from God's point of view. So first we have to acknowledge that God owns everything. That's your cue for amen. God owns everything. Psalm 24 verse 1 says, "The earth is the Lord's, and the fullness thereof, the world and those who dwell therein." Now let that settle for a moment. Everything you owe, or everything you own, everything you own, not everything you owe. Everything you own, everything you have, everything I have, it all belongs to who? To God. 1 Timothy verses 6 and 7 says, "But godliness with contentment is great gain." Why? "For we brought nothing into the world, and we cannot take anything out of the world." We didn't bring anything into the world. And when we die, we're not going to take anything with us in the grave. This means technically you own nothing, or you own nothing. We don't own anything in this world. It's all His. Your paycheck, it's His. Your house, it's His. Your abilities are His. And when that clicks into our minds, when we understand this concept, everything in our lives change. Because when I understand that, I don't ask, what do I want to do with my money? I'll start asking, what does God want me to do with what He gave me and already belongs to Him? So first, God owns everything. 2, we are managers, we're not owners. Because if God owns everything, we're managing that. Jesus tells us a story in Matthew chapter 25 about a master who entrusts resources, talents to his servants. Verse 21 says, "His master said to him, 'Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master.'" So when the master returns, he doesn't ask, "How much did you own?" He doesn't ask, "How much in your bank account?" He's going to ask, "What did you do with what I gave you? How did you use the resources, the talents that I gave you?" We call that stewardship. Were you a good steward, or you were a not so good one? Because we're not owners, we're managers. Think about this. If I gave you my phone, I told you, "Hey, can you hold this until I go down to the fellowship hall and come back?" When I come back, you're not going to go sell it on eBay, right? Why? Because it's not your phone. You're just holding it for me. You're managing it for me, right? So think about it this way. Our lives are just a long period of God telling us, "Hold this for me." Everything we have is a long period of God telling us, "Take care of this for me until I come back." And as good managers, we don't serve ourselves. Good managers serve the interest of their owner, their CEO. So the question becomes, am I managing my life in a way that honors God? Am I handling my money in a way that would make Him say to me, "Well done"? And not just well done, but enter into the joy of your master. If you read in that story and you continue till the end, you're going to see what happens to the not so good manager. He says, throw him out. Throw them out. And we don't want to be in that situation. Number 3, God's people are generous. When we look at the early church in the book of Acts, we see something very interesting. We don't see hesitant giving. We see radical generosity. Acts chapter 2, verses 42 to 45 says, "And they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and the fellowship, to the breaking of bread and the prayers. And awe came upon every soul, and many wonders and signs were being done through the apostles, and all who believed were together and had all things in common." And this is the key verse, 45. "And they were selling their possessions and belongings and distributing the proceeds to all as any had need." Now imagine how the church is going to be if we today follow that example. People selling their possessions, their meeting needs, living open-handed lives. Why? Think about why were they doing that? Why do I need to be generous to begin with? Generosity is not something that God asks for. Generosity is who God is. The most famous Bible verse, John 3:16. "For God so loved the world that He gave." He's so generous that He always gives. And as generous managers who serve a generous God, we become a giving people, generous giving people. So God's view is very clear. He owns it all, we manage it, and we give and we live generously. So if this is true, why is it still so hard for us to be that way? Why we don't see it reflected into our churches today? Don't worry, I have some things also for you to answer that question. Because we put in our life something I call roadblocks. And we need to be honest about really what keeps us awake at night sometimes. We set up roadblocks, we set up walls in our way that hinder us from reach that target. So let's look at some of the reasons why, or we tell ourselves why I don't give generously to God and I don't follow God's view of money. Number 1, the church talks too much about money. Have you ever heard this one before? Now I think the opposite, and it's not just because I'm the pastor. Let me explain. The church does not talk enough about money. But here's the truth. I believe that the church should be talking about what Jesus talked about, right? Let me repeat that one more time. The church should be talking about the things that Jesus talked about. Do you agree? All right. So, did Jesus talk about money? Yes. How much? A lot. Do you know that 1/3 of Jesus' parables are about money? 1/3. Now think about this way. If we plan a sermon year, 1/3 of a year is how much? 4 months. That's 17 Sabbaths in a year should be preaching about money. So technically, last Sabbath of this year would be the last Sabbath we preach about money. If we're going to follow what Jesus was talking about. But we don't do that, right? So does the church talk enough about money, or a lot about money, too much about money? The answer is no. But Jesus talked about money more than he talked about heaven and hell itself. He talked more about money than he talked about heaven, and then more than he talked about hell. And the question is, why? Why did Jesus talk that much about money? Because money is so deeply connected to the heart. That's number one. And money is deeply connected to every day of our lives. It's an essential thing that we use every day of our lives, but also is connected to your heart. So whenever we preach about money, and whenever this sermon itself is not an overemphasis, it's alignment. We're trying to talk about the things that Jesus talks about. Usually I preach twice a year about money. So this year, I still owe you 15 more sermons. We want to be up to standard with Jesus, right? The next thing that I always hear, the church doesn't need my money. Have you ever heard this one? Church doesn't need my money. And if you think that way, yes, you're right. The church doesn't need your money. God doesn't need your money, but God also wants your heart. And those two are connected to each other, by the way. Jesus said in Matthew 6:21, "For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." So he's asking for your heart, your treasure will follow. He's not asking for your treasure. So giving, whenever we give, we don't fund God. We're not funding God. It's about growing ourselves after His heart. Now, think about this. How many of us here today were blessed and ministered to by this church? Just raise your hand. I want you to how many of you been blessed by Wyoming Valley Church? How many of you were ministered to by Wyoming Valley Church? Now, that's most of us. Great. Now, if you said yes, I want you to understand that somebody gave their tithes and offerings to provide this church for you and me. Somebody gave their tithes and offering money for you and I to be blessed with this church. I look around this room and I'm so grateful because we have pews to sit on, we have projectors, we have sound system, we have heating that keeps us hot and cooling that keeps us cold. We have a lot of things that we are so thankful for, and we have that because somebody gave toward that in the past. And that person didn't give to a budget. That person gave so that we can be here today. And whenever we give, we get to do the same for the person who hasn't walked into the church yet. So yes, the church doesn't need your money, but the people who come to the church need the ministry of the church. So when we give to bless other people who come to the church. We don't give just to pay bills, even though that's still an essential thing. Another thing I hear a lot is, I can't afford to give. I'm not going to ask how many of us heard this. I'm going to say how many of us said this. Because I understand that feeling. We live in an expensive country. Life is hard, and it's very, very expensive to survive. Many times we have to choose to say no to the expensive stuff, right? But many times, it's not an income issue. It's a planning issue. Because whether you like it or not, we always find ways to afford the things that matter to us. We always find ways to afford our top priorities. Now, when we look at the Bible gives us how can we plan for that? God has established a system of tithing for His people, and it's a percentage giving. What do you mean by that? We give our first 10% to God. That's always the same, no matter what your income is. 10% is 10%. If your income is zero, 10% is zero. If your income is a million, 10% is 10% of a million, 100,000. So it's about priority and it's about mindset. Because do I put God as the top priority in my life? Do I put His mission and His church as the top priority? And here's the good thing. Most of those who can't afford to tithe and give offerings, I've heard them say that they want to give tithes and offerings. It's not that they're bad people and they're selfish. No, I want to contribute, but I can't. But I've discovered also that those who can't afford to give tithes and offerings, they can't because they don't have a plan. And that plan we call a budget. So the question is not, can I afford it? The question is, have I decided it matters? Have I decided that I want to do it? So if giving something you want to do, maybe it's a problem of not income, but it's your planning, and I'm going to talk about in a little bit. Number 4, and that I call the big elephant in the room. The pastor just wants money. So I want to talk to you heart to heart for a moment, okay? Because, as I said, this is the elephant in the room. It's like, here's another pastor talking about money because they want money. Here's the thing. I don't want something from you, but I want something for you. Now, here's the thing. Let me make a disclaimer. I'm not saying give me so I can give you, okay? It's not invest your money in me so you can get better rewards. I'm not talking about that. We're not a prosperity gospel here. Give money so you can get better. No. And that's why when you look at the Adventist church, we have a unique system that is different from other churches. Because tithe money goes to support the work of ministers and officers in higher levels. Okay? But this tithe goes to pay everybody's salaries, let's put it this way, all over the world. So if Wyoming Valley Church gives more tithe, I don't get a raise. So there's no personal benefit to me. So that's why I can come here boldly and say, guys, we need to give more. Because nothing is coming to me personally. On the other hand, when we give offerings, this is how we support our local church projects or whatever we do in our local church budgets, the ministries we do. And guess what? That also doesn't come to me. That goes to pay for other stuff. And let me say this, and it's like, if I wanted to get rich, I'm in the wrong job. If I wanted to buy a yacht or a BMW, which is my dream car, I would be something else. But I'm here because I want to serve God by helping us serve Him better. So the answer is no, I don't want your money for me, but yes, I want your money to bless other people through this church as we build a church that is doing God's mission, as we reach to more people and enjoy the blessing of generosity. Now let's get more theological. I've heard somebody say tithing is not in the New Testament. That's an Old Testament thing we don't have to follow anymore. Have you ever found yourself trying to look for a loophole? I've did that before. You look at the New Testament and you think, oh, maybe I'm off the hook in this. It's like Jesus died for that, so we don't have to do that anymore, right? But the thing is, Jesus doesn't lower the bar. He raises it to the heart. When you look at Jesus' words in Matthew 23:23, he affirms tithing when he corrects the Pharisees for being faithful tithers, but also for being hypocrites. He says in verse 23, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you tithe mint and dill and cumin, and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faithfulness. Those you have ought to do without neglecting the others." So basically he's telling them, you have to do both. You should tithe, and you should be nice or kind. So what is the difference between Old Testament and New Testament when it comes to tithing or to giving in offerings in general? The difference is just the big picture. What do I mean? The New Testament tells us that we should love to give. Tithing should never be a burden, but a blessing. God loves a cheerful giver, right? In the Old Testament, I have to just give my tithe. And by the way, there were 3 tithes in the Old Testament, not just 1. 3. So it's like 30%. Now we want to be in the New Testament. We don't want to be in the Old Testament, right? I don't want to give 30%. But there are 3 tithes in the Old Testament. We just love to focus on 1, which is fine. But in the New Testament, I don't do it because I have to. I do it because I want to. And the last one, I'll give when I have more. We tell ourselves that, but the reality is different. Because generosity, it's not about the amount in your bank account. Generosity is about the condition of your heart. 10% of 1,000 is still the same 10% of 1,000,000. It doesn't matter. God blesses us with more when we are faithful with the less. So if you're not going to give when you have little, you're not going to give when you have more. And if we're not faithful now, we're not going to be faithful suddenly when we become rich. It's like, God, give me $1 million. I promise I'll tithe. God says, well, that's why I'm not giving you the $1 million, because you're not. So we've talked about the why. We talked about the why not. But now I want us to focus on the how. Because when we have a vision without a plan, we're just talking in the air. That's hallucinations, and it's just stuff. So we have to answer this real question. What needs to change? What needs to change in my life, in my heart, so I can become a generous giver? What needs to change in my life and in my heart so I can be faithful, not just with my tithe to God, but also with my generosity in giving for other things? So let me give you 5 practical disciplines to see or to help us understand what really matters. And this is really where faith meets real life. Are you ready? Number 1, have a plan. Proverbs 29:18 says, where there is no prophetic vision, the people cast off restraint, but blessed is he who keeps the law. In other words, without vision, people cast off restraint. There is no control. How does that apply to money? If you don't tell your money where to go, it's just going to disappear. So we need to have a plan. We need to have a budget. Many times when we think about a budget, we think it's about control as a negative thing. But guess what? A budget is not restriction. It is a direction. It's saying, this is how I'm going to honor God with what He has given me. So a budget helps you prioritize your needs and align spending with values. It gives purpose to every dollar you spend, making sure that your decisions reflect your goals and priorities. Even a budget helps you know that you can't have enough money till the end of the month, right? Do I have more days than money to live my life? That's why we need to have a budget. Number 2, get out of debt. Proverbs 22:7 says, the rich rules over the poor, and the borrower is a slave of the lender. Slaves don't have options. They just do what they're told. They're stuck. Slaves keep the job they hate to pay the bills they owe. Because debt limits your freedom. It limits your options. It limits your ability to be the generous giver, because it's hard to give when you barely can pay your bills, right? You can't live an open-handed life when everything is already owed. And I'm talking about car payments, student loans, credit cards. It's like, that's the trap that, it's like, when I first came to this country, it's like, it's the first trap, the first shackle they put around your, you can't even buy a car without a credit score, right? You can't even do anything without having a credit score, because everybody in this country buys things by loans. I don't think very, very few people who can afford to buy a brand new car cash. Very, very few people. So anything you need to do in this country, you need to have what? Credit score. And that's the first thing that they put on you so you can fall for the system. And once you're in, it's just like a snowball. You start with the first credit card, you max it, you have to pay, so you get another one to pay the first one, and then you keep going on and on and on and on. That's why we need to have a budget. A budget is your roadmap to freedom. You want to track your expenses. Identify areas where you can cut back so you can put more money toward paying your debt. I know I'm going to sound like I'm doing a financial peace seminar right now, but these are practical stuff that we need to learn about. If you have debt, the experts say, and this works all the time, focus on the smallest debt you have. Pay that first. From small to big. Once you get one off, you feel that you've done a great thing. So I have 5 more cards to pay. You get another one, I have 4. You get one, and this is how you go from being stuck in this loop into being free. You'll gain momentum, you get confidence, and this will help you to become more generous in your life. So if you feel like you're a slave to your bills today, hear this: God is a deliverer. God will help you to get out of that when you ask Him to help you with that, but also when you work on it yourself. Because He wants you to come out of that cage that we're all being put in this system. And it starts with a small step of stewardship. Because trusting God's provision and timing with discipline, determination will help you move forward into this financial freedom, one step at a time. And when you do that, and as you do that, you will be able to give generously, and you will be able to live purposely. You will be able to enjoy the peace that, I don't have to pay bills by the end of the month. other than just the necessary ones. 3, live on less than you make. Proverbs 21:20 says, the wise have wealth and luxury, but fools spend whatever they get. I'm tempted to ask a question, but I'm not. So this is simple, but this is not easy, right? Because Bible calls this what? Wisdom. This is wisdom. It's foolish to spend all that you have, and even it's more foolish to spend something you don't have. Credit cards. Right? It's more foolish to spend something that you don't have. Now, what's the opposite of foolishness? It's living on less than you make. It's called a margin. We all need margin. We need space. Because if everything that comes in goes right back out, there's no margin. Without margin, there's no peace. So think about it this way. When you get paid, what's the first thing we do? We take 10% to God. That's our tithe. And then we take whatever percentage you set in your mind to give as offerings. Some people say 5%, whatever. I'm just going to go 5 just for the sake of math, to make it easier on you guys and on myself. But also, so you have 10 and 5, but also you want to add 10% that you want to take out of your paycheck, and you want to give that to your future self. We call that savings. And you want to live on the rest of that, which is 75%. So if your expenses during the month doesn't or exceeds 75% of your income, then you're in trouble. You're going to go to start borrowing money. And the goal is to create space. Because when we have 100%, or when we spend 100% of what we make, we leave 0% room for God to move. So here's my challenge for you. What does it look like for you to start creating only 1% space this month? Just 1%. Try to create more space in your life. I'm not asking to change your whole life by Monday morning. No. I'm asking you to give God permission to look at your bank statement with you. Give him the permission, him, to look at your bank statement and help you. Start with 1% and see what he does. And he's going to change things. Because think about this. If you can't afford to tithe and give offerings, you will never afford to save. Which is my next point. Learn to save. You know, I grew up in a culture where people have a lot of children. Just to give you an idea, my dad has 8 siblings. So there are 9 total. These are the ones who survived. So this is the culture where I come from. People have a lot of children. You see a family, a man and his wife, and you have 6 children walking with him, and the wife is pregnant with another one, and then you know that the wife is not working, and only the man is doing everything, and then you ask them, how can you afford for your children? Always, and I can guarantee that, always they will say, God will provide. Always, God will provide. And I'm not saying anything bad toward that. Yes, God will provide. I love that faith. You know, we have another saying where I come from. It says, I'm trying to translate it, and it says, you know, when you have a child, always when the child comes, the blessing will come with it. It's like, don't worry, just have children, and, you know, it will be taken care of. But when you come to this country and you see the child comes, then the blessing that comes with it is your hospital bill. Right? But that's why we need to learn to save. Yes, God will provide. I love that faith, but I've learned many, many times that God will provide by giving us what? Wisdom to save when we call it the years of plenty. So when the years of famine comes, we'll have something to survive. Saving is not lack of faith, it's wise stewardship. And we find that in the story of Joseph. Genesis 41 says, "And let them gather all the food of these good years that are coming and store up grain under the authority of Pharaoh for food in the cities, and let them keep it. That food shall be a reserve for the land against the 7 years of famine that are to occur in the land of Egypt, so that the land may not perish through the famine." In the story of Joseph, God told them, there are 7 years of plenty, but after that, it's going to be 7 years of famine. Be wise. We don't know when our years of famine is going to come. That's why we want to be wise today. It's preparing, it's trusting, it's planning. What we save now is going to help us in the future. And here's the thing. We don't want to be stingy, but we want to be wise, smart savers. That's a principle that I have. Any amount in my budget through the month that I did not spend, that's not extra money to just go splurge it everywhere. That goes to savings on top of this. I'm lucky this month I didn't have to pay for whatever. I budgeted $300 for gas and I spent only $200. There's $100 extra. Well, that goes to savings. I don't just go out and eat with it. And that's how we do it. Because later on, I might need it. Having a savings in a Joseph-style reserve helps us, especially, for example, when your car transmission goes out. When your roof leaks. Wow. That's a big thing that you need to have money for. So imagine the peace of mind you have when you know that you're prepared for the unexpected. That you know that I have enough saved just in case. And the expert says, if the minimum you want to have in your savings account, equivalent of 3 months of what you need to survive. 3 months. If you have more, that's better, but at least try to have this 3 months. And finally, become a generous giver. This is the goal. We don't want to just survive. We don't want to just manage, but we want to thrive. And we want to live generously, because generosity changes us. And over the years, I've seen this many, many times. We have a lot of faithful tithers. We have a lot of faithful tithers, and that's great. But we have a few faithful, generous givers. And that's where things make difference. We take the tithe, well, that's the minimum I have to do to keep my good standing, right? That's what I need to do, and I'll just do it. But I need to be also generous in my giving. Hey, when we paid the mortgage last year, that was because each one of you were generous givers. Because we all contributed toward that, and this is how we do it. We always keep giving, because this is not my church, this is our church. And this is how we need to move on. 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 6 and 7 says, the point is this: whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. And whoever sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. Each one must give as he had decided in his heart, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. Decide, I want And even don't decide before you consult with God. It's like, Lord, how much do you want me to give? Where do you want me to give? And decide in your heart, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to put it in my budget, and I'm going to try you, Lord, with that, and see how you're going to bless me even more when I don't care about money as much as I care about my relationship with you. Because we need to plant some seeds. And that also true about our finances. 2 Corinthians 8, 6, and 7 says, accordingly, we urge Titus that as he had started, so he should complete among you this act of grace. But as you excel in everything, in faith, in speech, in knowledge, in all earnestness, and in our love for you, see that you excel in this act of grace also. Now, what is he talking about here? What is this act of grace that Paul is talking about? He's talking about giving. He's saying giving is important and is as important as your faith, your speech, your knowledge, your earnestness, and the love we have for you. It's equally important that we all grow and excel, not just to grow a little bit, but to excel in this act. Because generosity breaks greed. It builds faith. It reflects God. And one day, you'll move from, I have to give, to, hey, I get to give. And I'm enjoying it, and I'm having a blessing because of it. Because when we view giving as a privilege, rather than an obligation, then we begin to understand the true essence of stewardship. Generosity transforms your heart. You shift the focus from yourself to others. And in doing so, we mirror the abundant love that God has for us. He gave us everything. And He asks only for our heart. So as we grow our ability to give freely, joyfully, we cultivate the spirit of gratitude as we trust in God's provision. Yes, when we give financially, monetarily, we bless others, but also it's going to enrich our lives. It's going to fill us with purpose. It's going to fill us with fulfillment. And we're going to see that we are truly part of His mission. Because it's not just about the act of giving, but it's about embracing a lifestyle that honors God and serves His people. So the question is not, does money matter? Money matters. But the question is, what does money reveal about my heart? Because at the end of the day, it's all His. And we simply decide what kind of managers we're going to be. So today, I want you to decide in your heart. It's not out of pressure, not out of guilt, not out of any compulsion, but out of trust. Trusting that God will take care of our finances, God will take care of our future, and we trust Him with our heart. Because when you put God first, we stop being owned by the things that we have. We become free. Consider the impact that we do every time we give. Because that impact doesn't just stay within Wyoming Valley Church. It goes through the state of Pennsylvania, it goes through the United States, it goes through North America, it goes through the world till the end of the world. Every single thing we do here affects the rest of the world. Every single penny we give here affects the rest of the world. And this is how we build this church that mirrors the grace and the abundance that God gives us and showers upon us. And what matters at the end of the day is the words that He's going to tell us. Well done, good and faithful servants. Enter into the joy of your master. That's why we do it. We don't do it to get more money from God. We don't do it so we can feel good about ourselves. We don't do it just to check the box that we did it. No, because we are good and faithful servants and stewards toward God. Amen?